You see, life is like a voyage. Sometimes the sea is calm. Sometimes the wind blows softly. Sometimes the sun is shining. Thank God for those times. Maybe that's where you are right now, just sailing along. And if you are, enjoy it. It's a gift of God. But sometimes the wind rises. Sometimes the sky darkens. Sometimes we find ourselves in the midst of a terrible storm. And that's the way life is.
Well, friend, maybe you're in a storm right now, like the disciples in this boat. Here's my question. Who's in the boat with you? It's Jesus. He's in our boat. He's in our life. And we would do well to remember who He is and what He can do. He still quiets storms, and He can quiet the heart of His child in the middle of a storm.
This may be the most important thing you learn today. Storms come even when you're following Jesus. If you're in a storm and you're wondering where you went wrong, I want to encourage you. This storm doesn't necessarily mean you've missed God. Some storms are of your own making. But often, storms come even though you're following Jesus.
Why were they in a storm? They were in a storm. Don't miss this. They were in a storm because they were in the will of God. It was Jesus that constrained them to get into that boat. They were in this storm because they were obeying Jesus. Why would Jesus want them to be in a storm? Because He wanted them to grow. I want to ask you a question. Those of you who've been on the trail for a while, when did you grow the most? When everything was fine? When you were smoothly sailing? Or when the storm came?
Maybe it's a relational storm with your spouse, your kids, your parents, or a friend. And the relationship that meant so much to you is now in deep trouble. Maybe your financial boat is getting rocked by heavy waves. You're sinking deeper and deeper in debt and wondering if you'll ever be able to get your head up above water again. Maybe it's an emotional storm. For you, the storm is internal. You're fighting a battle no one else can see. With depression, anxiety, or fear, you're in a storm.
Jesus expects you to trust Him in the storm. Regardless of your storm, Jesus is your solution. Jesus promises to bring you through your storm.
Being a Christian never exempts you from a storm. Don't think that because you have a tough time, you're disobeying God. The disciples got in this storm because they obeyed God. Jesus said, get in the boat. They got in the boat and sailed right into a storm. They were right in the center of God's will, but in the middle of a storm. So when you're going through a tough time, do not automatically assume I must be out of the will of God, because you might be exactly where God wants you to be. Storms are impartial.
I don't know how people face the storms of life without Jesus. Mark, in his telling the story, gives us Jesus' words. Jesus stood up in the boat. He arose and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. There are a lot of wind and waves around us.
Listen, we are going to have difficulty. And the first thing that you can say when difficulty comes is that God's providence is over it all. I am governed by His providence. God's wonderful plan is in effect. Now, God's plan is not to indulge you. God's plan is to enlarge you.
When storms come, never forget, Jesus is in the boat with you. Jesus is in your boat.